All right, we're going to have some good content up here, and we're going to also have, as we said, some fun. This is going to be a fully moderated conversation and an interactive one, unrehearsed for the most part. What I'd like to do is introduce the panelists and ask them to actually introduce themselves. So, Sophia, why don't you start? A little about yourself and, of course, your fund, and we'll go right down the line, and then I'll throw out the first question.
I'm Sophia Nadur, managing partner at BP Ventures. My particular focus is on new markets, which for BP is everything except UK, Europe, and the US. So my patch covers Asia Pacific, the Middle East, Israel, and Latin America. So I'm going to be pretty busy. The fund size is about $800 million. Every year we invest about $200 million, and I've just finished my first deal. I'm a bit of a GCV virgin, so don't mind that.
Daniel.
Thanks. Hi, Daniel Abasaki. I'm an investment partner at ZX Ventures, which is the CVC of AB InBev. I look after our strategy and early stage investments for the Europe and Africa sleeve of our global beverage fund, which also covers Asia Pacific, Latin America, and North America. We look at everything beyond beer to help ABI build a portfolio of the future.
Hi, Chris Sheldrick, co-founder, CEO of What 3 Words. We are a global address system. We divided the world into 3-meter squares, named each one with 3 words out of the dictionary to make a very simple way to communicate locations around the world. We're based in London, team of 150 people, and we have a number of corporate investors, including Intel, Sony, Mercedes-Benz, IKEA, and several others. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Chris's role on the panel is going to keep us honest in our conversation. We're going to, again, try to tease out hopefully some observation and insights that you don't already know. Obviously, we have a sophisticated audience, and again, Chris will sort of give us the nuance of what he sees on the other side of the fence sitting around that board table. So, Sophia, just turning to you to start, what is your sense in terms of how best to maximize the value you bring to the table?
So I've just recently completed a deal in India where we led a Series A $25 million investment in an e-mobility company called BlueSmart. Think of them as an advancement of Didi and Uber in terms of that idea. In other words, they have a ride-hailing business, but they have as well developed EV charging infrastructure. So it's quite an integrated, fully formed acorn. And it's our first entry again into India. For me, I would say there are 3 things that I think has helped make this quite a successful investment for us. The first is around experience. Like I said, I'm new to venturing, but I've been on the dark side or the light side for decades. I've worked in CPG, FMCG, I've worked with consumer health, and I've run my own business, launched a company, sold it, made a bit of money, so this is all fun. Yeah, but I come to ventures with experience. So when I first came to BP, my first job was to develop e-mobility or e-mobility strategy for the company when it was still a side hustle. Yeah, now e-mobility is front center to BP, so I was asked to come into ventures. But for the startup and for success, having a bit of experience, actually walking in the shoes of the company, understanding the industry, not just from reading a bit of the pitch book analyses, but actually working in the industry a bit has helped to really build trust and also understand if this is a winning bet or not. I would say the second area is around empathy. I come from a developing background as well, developing country background. That helps a lot in the particular markets that I'm focused in, understanding the cultural and the sort of nuances that we live with in terms of the old innovation and the need to be more adaptable in terms of how you build businesses to become unicorns in their respective markets. And the other issues around equity. So making sure that you come to the table, seeing the other side as an equal partner. BlueSmart, the management team, are quite full of veterans. They've been working in Uber, they've worked in energy, they've worked in a number of other industries, so they're not, let's say, young kids on the block. They come with quite seasoned experience as well. But actually, in terms of equity, ensuring that we don't just pump money into their company, but I engineered a commercial agreement. So our Reliance GeoBP joint venture has also signed a commercial agreement with BlueSmart, and they're helping to scale up faster the EV charging infrastructure. I've also ensured that we have a strategic cooperation agreement in place with BP parent company, so my business units. And of course, I know them, so it was easier to negotiate that to an extent. But that ensures that the BlueSmart is not just getting our money and me on their board, but they're getting as well a much more full offer in terms of commercial.
Can I interrupt on that? That's a great point. So
Yeah.
as you were courting the company, were they looking at you because you could bring them that commercial deal, or once you were around the table, it occurred to all of you that you could bring that in, and the CEO may have approached you first?
Yes.
What's the sequence in there?
Yeah, so the sequence is that I met the guys at an event, Indian ecosystem event, and I thought they were pretty interesting, but I'd kind of like, there were so many interesting companies. And then my commercial partners, so the GeoBP commercial guys, were approached by them to help them with charging infrastructure. But I'd already made that contact, so therefore I would say it's kind of the commercial interest then got them to talking to us as well around not just doing a commercial partnership, but getting a bit deeper, because they really needed cash to help them scale up, and they were going through a pandemic. And you can imagine a B2C company going through a pandemic, it was quite hell.
And Chris, I just want to jump. How important is it to you to have your corporate strategic investor, or quite frankly any investor, have basically entrepreneurial experience in the sense that they may have run a business themselves, started a business themselves, or that's a nice to have and you really want that commercial deal?
I would definitely say that would be nice to have. I can't say, even though we have a number of corporates, probably 6 or 7 in total, I'm not sure any of them themselves have had entrepreneurial background from what I'm aware. So it's not something I've got the luxury of being able to compare between. I do think, though, that the commercial deal with the corporate is the most important thing. And from what I've learned across those 6 or 7, it is by no means a given, even if that was the basis of the investment, that is going to happen quickly. And actually just making sure that the person on your board or your key person from that company is aligned, that the most important thing is to get that deal done commercially. That, for us, would eclipse everything, I think.
Great. And then, Daniel, coming back to you, sort of just want to understand what your approach is, again, in terms of, again, I want to understand that. Is driving that commercial deal what's paramount for you for the portfolio company, or are you looking at it really from your own perspective in terms of bringing value back into the organization?
It's a great question. I think first we've invested, we backed entrepreneurs. We want to see this play out. And then we think to ourselves, as strategic investors, what are the tools we have in our toolkit that can help them unlock value? And usually it's us providing a menu of sorts, right? Whether it's route to market capabilities, whether it's introductions to the right co-packers or the flavor houses. And then they'll pick from that menu, or sometimes they come to us with just a bespoke ask, right? So I think one discrete example is we've invested in a business where, non-alc, and they approached us thinking about how they could leverage our infrastructure, just be quicker to market, be closer to consumers. So we were able to, as an investment team who liaise with them on a almost weekly basis, make that introduction to the right people within ABI, so they could have a commercial discussion, arm's length, about what would make sense for that business. And they're able to onboard successfully on the platform, and we've seen that work out pretty well. So it tends to be more from, as an investor, what makes sense for the entrepreneurs we backed, and then we can make the right introduction and it's value additive. Then we have corporate and entrepreneurs have a differentiated conversation.
So to both of you, I understand the commercial angle and I understand the story you just told, but are you oftentimes brought in by the venture capitalist who sort of knows how you play in this space? Do you bring them in? Is it serendipity where you just sort of bump into each other along the way? How do you interrelate with the venture dollars coming into the table, because that informs the relationship as well?
I mean, for me, for us, I mean, we depend a lot on venture capitalists for introductions. They generally are the companies who are providing the seed cash in. and often will be co-investors, may not lead the round. So it's important because often they're the ones who unearth the acorns, yeah, and usually these startups or the scaling up companies, they had enough of the venture capitalists, or they're happy with, they understand how it works, but they now want a strategic to help build out the commercial piece. Or in the case of, there's a company we invested in a couple of years ago called FreeWire, which is a Californian startup, which is this charging company. And originally it was just doing mobile charging units for food trucks, which was $1 billion opportunity. But we helped them pivot to now competing in a $40 billion market by helping them pivot their business into a battery integrated charging unit. So in a way, the venture capitalists obviously are important because they help seed that company and get them the first prototypes. But then our role then is to help them pivot, find the right market, and then move to that second stage.
How did you get to that company? Through the VCs?
Yeah. Through the VCs. So FreeWire came via VCs,
right,
yeah.
Daniel, any response on that or Sam?
Yeah, it's very similar. I think we look at smaller ticket sizes. We're seed through Series B. So we play in that seed, Series A. We were typically the first institutional capital to come in. When it gets to Series B, we find that there's typically a consumer or F&B focused fund who's in the shareholding, and either they've made the introduction or entrepreneurs have reached out to us, and we look at each other and say, you've taken the business this far, it's been great, you've professionalized it, made it ready for us to come in. And then us as strategic investors have a foundation which we can really help turbocharge that business. So it tends to be both ways, but at that Series B stage, we find that we're being pulled in by the VCs.
Right, and just to emphasize, you're willing to come in before the institutional financial players, the VCs?
Yes.
You're going first.
As a function of being just a seed investor or Series A, typically is we're coming in after a good angel round has occurred.
Yeah. Interesting. Chris, here's one for you. Biggest disappointment in working with a corporate strategic, unrelated to your cap table presently. Where could they do better, do you think?
So I guess a couple of areas. One would be speed. And
that's a classic historical kind of thing. I think it's getting better, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we have a few CVCs, and there can be a bit of self-reinforcement, which is that, one says we're slow and another one says we're slow too, and then it becomes the norm that the things become slow. And it feels like it's not the kind of thing which can affect things, but it is something which accrues over time, and means that when you really need to get some deals done, if the CVC, and some are set up better than others in terms of they just have delegated authority to be able to sign documents and stuff, that can be a blocker in certain occasions when you need to get stuff done fast. I'd also say perhaps a couple of times we've come up against this thing where, we call it a strategic investor because you have a really good commercial synergy with them. But actually then, maybe they want you to launch in a new market that you don't want to launch in. And it starts off kind of quite friendly, and then it's you both have your different camps of opinion. And there's sort of some blog post out there saying strategic investors are actually the opposite or something, which is that if you have that commercial deal, it's the opposite because you've both got your own agendas. The real strategics are the ones who are only financially aligned with you. And sometimes that comes up and bites you if you've got people who have significant weight on your board who want you to go in a certain direction. So I think just remembering that actually we're meant to be on the same page here, and certainly from our point of view, we really need to be careful what countries we go into in what order. That would be something else. I would say a lot of this, the difficulty we have is counterbalanced very positively by the credibility we get from the brands who the people have heard of. With what we're doing, people often say, really nice idea, who's actually behind this kind of slightly crazy idea, people can call us, and then we can list off this realm of very, very credible corporates. That counts for a lot more than I think if they were VCs that the general public hadn't heard of. And so to an extent, we're happy to weather that, and yes, it'll be slower sometimes and more complicated, but we are net up, I'm sure, given on the basis that we've gone for this corporate first investor strategy.
Got it. I want to pivot just a bit. how, in addition to the commercial arrangement side of things, how are you relying on the corporates for industry trends, sector strategy, not just your strategy, but the sector strategy? Where's the hockey puck, so to speak, going, as opposed to just, again, having some smart person around the table?
I would say...
And then I'm going to ask you folks, by the way, to react to that. Stay alert. We're coming at you.
I think it is very beneficial. So for us, like, we didn't come from the automotive sector, but automotive is a huge part for us. Like, What Three Words is built into a lot of car navigation systems. And the fact that we've got four on our cap table, but certainly the car companies being Mercedes, Subaru, Chinese one called SAIC. And just being able to speak to them about the stuff that they are developing, and I know there's plenty out there in the press about what every car company is developing, but to actually have a personal conversation with people and understand where we need to think about our offering. So an example would be voice input into cars is really relevant for us. But if you just read the press, you'll get very confused as to what you need to do with who. Whereas just talking to them about what they're doing, how their sort of supply network is changing, has been a massive, massive help to us to make sure that the product is right, pitched right. So for us, I think that has been probably an underrated thing that we now just take for granted because we have these people on speed dial. But I think if you're wading into the automotive sector fresh, then you're like us, you're in for a nasty surprise of how complicated that world is.
So Daniel and Sophia, do you get drawn upon for your experience in that area by your companies, or do you actually have to sort of remind your CEOs to draw upon you for your experience, because they're forgetting that critical component there of your expertise?
We get drawn upon, right? I think we've seen it take place across 3 different spheres. So from a category analysis, because we are a global fund, they speak to say, like, this particular category, let's say RTD cocktails. How is this market developed in Brazil or the US versus, the entrepreneur in South Africa or the UK? So they come to us saying, is there a bit of pattern recognition that we can pull on to help us scale? And I think being more granular, saying if you've done this a few times in a few different markets, what can we learn from you to understand, how do we get the first steps right that are quite critical? So we find that they're coming to us and just saying, hey, we know who's behind you as ZX, can you open the kimono a bit and give us some of the intel? So it's a very robust discussion, but it's usually founder-led, so they appreciate that.
It's funny because a couple of years ago, I sat on a table with a couple of my colleagues talking to Didi, which is the Uber equivalent in China and the biggest ride-hail company. And I was at that first meeting where we set up what has become a $1 billion joint venture, in China between BP and Didi. And it was that retelling that story to the CEO of the company, Anmol Jaggi, which instantly endeared himself to me, endeared myself to him, and we immediately hit it off because all of a sudden he understood that I was really an insider. And that's something which, since then, he's always drawn upon, okay, how can I give him, not necessarily I have the information, but I act as a door to be able to access the insights and information to help his business grow and develop, because he knows that they know that they need support from other companies. So it's really, really symbiotic. But I think there's a lot of trust that was built quite early on, and that's partly because I've kind of sat in his shoes as well, in terms of insights and understanding the pressure it is to be able to grow and scale his business as well.
So one thing I haven't heard much about is talent. How does the organization, and I guess Chris kind of reminded me, kind of touched on it just slightly, is how does the portfolio company tap into the huge resources or relatively deep resources of your organization for their organization beyond some of the points we're talking about?
I mean, so you're right. I mean, I work for, you can call it a dinosaur, one of those dinosaur companies that we are being disrupted, and if we don't disrupt, we'll be dead in 20 years' time. We're 112 years old, but that doesn't guarantee our success. So For us, we bring our portfolio companies, the CEOs and other parts of the business into our business, and we have them share some of the insights and some of the knowledge and skills and help build our capabilities to be more agile, more fast. So your point, Chris, around speed to market and being able to be responsive.
What does that mean? So when you bring them into your organization, are you actually working with engineering talent that's sort of seconded or they're
Yes.
sharing? Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes we have brought a few portfolio company executives into the company, seconded in, and also we have them at events, at workshops. Because actually, it's one of the ways that they also build capabilities as well. Because it's not that the entire team is fully formed. Yeah, and sometimes they need as a complementary skills which BP in its core business can support. So.
And what are you guys seeing then?
Yeah, I think for us it's two-phased, right? In the first phase, because they're so early, that's Series A, that's seed, they're tapping into talent within our fund. We have a studio of sorts, operating executives with just world-class expertise in supply, logistics, marketing, branding. They tap into that. And then our networks, they need to fill gaps in their own management team bench. And as they scale and becomes more interesting, larger, able to plug into ABI, that's when you can tap into like that talent base of people. So it's really two phases. As they mature, they go from us and our networks into then the broader ABI ecosystem.
They, on that point, in terms of tapping into your talent, I mean, are they, or your talent network, I should say, how does that working with the venture capitalists? Because they also have talent networks as well. It's just sort of complementary, I suppose.
It is complementary, but I think sometimes if you're an early stage business, where are you going to find someone who knows category management or revenue management for an RTD cocktail brand, right? It's so specific. You don't know what you don't know at that stage.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we know, and we're able to at least make the introduction where we can, and then hopefully it's an organic process, and they say we want to work together.
Chris, any reactions so far?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that certainly for us, we have different relationships with the different investors, but just thinking of some really good times when being part of the corporate makes you really feel like part of the family. And let's say a great example would be when we go out to Japan, we have an investment from Sony. There's a guy from Sony who literally insists on coming to every meeting with us, and will happily take over my pitch and continue in Japanese, and frankly does a very good job of it. But they will and have helped with everything from trying to recruit to making sure that our story is told in the right way. We have a similar relationship with Mercedes, where we're basically part of the family. We show up at CES. We're kind of just de facto on their booth. Most of our meetings happen in their cars. It's a very cost-efficient way of running CES, frankly, for us. But it's great when that kind of happens as part and parcel of one of the investments. And that's taken a few years. Not all of them are like that, and it's often the ones that you have the close deals with where that materializes. But it's a great way of getting into these industries that we just were not from ourselves, and getting into a new country fast.
And the nice thing too, the nice thing as well is that it's just portfolio company and strategic, but it's also portfolio companies among each other. So like what we've also encouraged as well is the portfolio companies talking to each other, and because there are some potentially complementary businesses that offers can be created working together. So we have a couple of companies that I'm working now in the UAE, targeting a big company who's decarbonizing and digitalizing its operations. And where we pulled two portfolio companies together, a little bit kicking and screaming, but once they realized the market was there, then it became a marriage of sorts. Yeah. And so it's not just back to the mothership.
But I think it's important to emphasize this takes a lot of work on the part of, say, your sides, right? This is not self-fulfilling, right? It's not like you just plug it in and it moves. You're the one who's sort of pulling resources and spending significant amounts of time with the portfolio company in the sense behind the scenes you're making this all happen. Fair enough?
We're under pressure. I mean, we've got to deliver financial returns and strategic value. And we're being measured. I'm incentivized by delivering financial return and strategic value. So there's enough impetus to not just sit on the sidelines. Yeah, it's not going to just return on its own. Yeah.
Well said, Sophia.
Yeah. It's not. Yeah.
So we talked about the talent side, we talked about the commercial arrangements. Chris, is there something else we're missing? And we talked about strategy a bit, how to tap into the CVCs. What else can the corporates bring to the table? And I'll pose it on the other side as well. Where do you think this whole industry might be moving where you can actually take it to the next level? So let me just pose it to Chris first, if he has a reaction, and then like you guys to just take us a little further out in the few minutes remaining.
So in my view, the biggest thing the corporate can do when they come on board is find as senior a sponsor as possible in the organization who is actually going to sort of look after the fact of the investment and the commercial. Because too often, I think we get faced with, this is a big company, we're the investment team, and actually the commercial team's over here, and you feel like because they're all part of the same company, stuff is just going to happen because, of course, they're all aligned. But actually, people have different incentives and different teams. And there's a great article somewhere which says, the CEO must be the chief sponsor of any acquisition or any investment because they're the person who's going to do this. Now, it's not always the CEO, depending on the company, but there should be somebody who really deeply cares that that investment has been made, who is a phone call away, genuinely, not just sort of in name, who if you run into the difficulty that the commercial team says, actually, I'm not in a hurry to do this integration, will put pressure and say, look, we've invested. Because now, actually, if you're slow, you're doing the portfolio company a disservice because somebody else in the sector says, oh, great, they've invested. How are you getting on with them? And if you say, well, they're not in a hurry, then it ends up counting against you. So I think from our point of view, having somebody who's immediately post-investment, who is senior, who goes, this is really important to get done, is the biggest value we could get.
That's a great observation. Folks, in your 10 seconds each, again, where do you think you'd like to take your role to the next level, or how do you do that?
Just do more of the same. I think there's a huge market out there, fantastic technologies and business solutions out there to go invest in. It's just how do you bundle it up and really deliver those financial and strategic returns in as quick as time, but also delight customers. Because at the end of the day, we're here in the job to satisfy and delight folks.
I think for us, it's about more of the same and developing the ecosystem. I think food and beverage is one of the last of the old industries that has yet to be sort of disrupted, so to speak. So we know we're one of the early dedicated investors. So making sure that ecosystem makes sense for entrepreneurs to enter, be successful, deliver returns, and then build that flywheel.
Great, that's great. Thank you. That was very illustrative. I want to thank you all for joining the panel. I want to thank you for listening in. I didn't introduce myself, but I'm Victor Boyajian. It says I'm a global chair. I'm global chair of something, so I'm global chair of Dentons, which is the largest law firm in the world. My colleagues are here from Germany, Thomas Schubert. I saw Yvonne Saunders here from Dublin, Joe Altendorf here from London as well. So again, we really do appreciate working with the corporate community and of course the entrepreneurs as well that have the big ideas that we're trying to tap into. So again, thanks everybody, and we're off to the next one.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Victor. That was a really impressive panel and wonderful insights. So I think it's nice to see What Three Words back again. I think last time you came, you met Sony here or something like that, and they became an investor. Yeah. So it's nice to see that interaction actually lead into such wonderful success. So congratulations, Chris. Enjoy. Safe flight as well.